Well, alongside the G7 countries themselves, leaders of many of the world's most powerful nations have also been invited to Hiroshima, among them Brazil, India, Indonesia and South Korea. But one absent nation loomed large over the summit, China. And joining me live to discuss its role is Shihoko Goto, Deputy Director for the Asia Programme at the Wilson Center, a US government-backed think tank. Welcome to the programme. What role do you think China played at this summit?
Well, much of the conversation was actually centered around China. Of course, China is having its own summit meeting in Central Asia, bringing together what used to be the Soviet satellite states together and making them, bringing it into its own sphere. The fact that we have seen so much discussion about China is a reminder that there is a great deal of concern about the power that China wields on the global economy. And the biggest concern at the moment is about Chinese coercion. That is to say, the leveraging of China's economic impact and weaponizing it effectively to impose its own political will, especially on smaller countries. And so what we've seen at the G7 is to talk about how to counterbalance that, how to strengthen not only the ability for the G7 themselves to push back against Chinese coercion, but also to protect the smaller countries as well.
Talking about that term economic coercion, which we saw from the G7 leaders, G7 leaders are calling on countries to avoid it, but have they provided incentives for countries to get on board? We've heard the stick. Do we have the carrot, essentially?
Right. So I think one of the big questions right now is to say, well, China is offering a lot of money. It's providing a lot of incentives to have Chinese support. What is the G7? What are the rich countries providing in return to the global South? And there is greater clarity that is emerging with this latest G7 summit meeting. That is to say that there is an alternative to China, not necessarily when it comes to building infrastructure cheaply, but they're going to provide money that is more sustainable for long-term projects, quality infrastructures, and an ability to work together with against China, should China impose its will politically and use that as a whip to corral the emerging markets to its will.
Something else I want to touch on, I mean, looking at this summit, the support for Ukraine has just been so apparent, it's been so strong. But I want to ask you about Taiwan, because do you think watching on, it feels that it would have similar support if China were to make a further move on it politically or to take a move militarily?
Right. Well, I'm sure that the Taiwanese leadership would very much like to be a participant of the G7 summit meeting, just as Zelensky is there as well. Of course, the situation is so that Taiwan is not a country. It cannot participate in international forum, including G7 meetings as well. It is looking very closely at how not only how NATO and the G7 are coming to the support of Zelensky, but also to see what kind of support that could translate into supporting Taiwan as well. There is a great deal of encouragement, I think, on the part of the Taiwanese, not just because there is so much continued international support well over a year for Ukraine, but the fact that in the statement that was released, there is continued support for Taiwan and expectations for the G7 and the international community to come to the support of Taiwan, whatever shape that may take.
How important do you think this summit has been for Japan? Would you say it's bolstered its prominence on the world stage once again?
Absolutely. For Japan, this has been an ability to really hone down on the message that it has been continuing over the last few years, that is to say, to talk about not just a free and open Indo-Pacific, but also to insist on a rules-based order worldwide. its commitment to go beyond the G7 and to invite countries like India, as well as South Korea, and Brazil is really a reflection on the part of Japan to be more inclusive, to ensure that there is greater support for some of those big agendas, especially in countering the Chinese threat that Japan is at the front line of counterbalancing.
And on that point, briefly, if you don't mind, with Indonesia, South Korea, India attending, as you've just mentioned there, are we seeing a formation of a new alliance against China, or are we not there yet?
We're seeing reaffirmation of commitment amongst the leading democracies of the world, that there is this ability to band together, that it is not simply about China encroaching upon the international system, that there is a alternative to that. And we are seeing greater clarity in what shape that will take. And that shape is to say that there is coordinated economic as well as military and political support to ensure that this rules-based order continues to thrive.
Shihoko Goto, Deputy Director for the Asia Programme at the Wilson Centre. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.